Hey class, I'm going to be preaching on Mark 9, 14 through 29, and I'm going to be using my laptop here as kind of a guide with notes and things like that. And so I'm just going to jump right in. So I'm going to start with Mark 9, 14. And when they came to the disciples, they saw a great crowd around them, scribes arguing with them. And immediately all the crowd, when they saw him, were greatly amazed and ran up to him and greeted him. And he asked them, "What are you arguing about with them?" And someone from the crowd answered him, "Teacher, I brought my son to you, for he has a spirit that makes him mute, and whenever it seizes him, it throws him down, and he foams and grinds his teeth and becomes rigid. So I asked your disciples to cast it out, and they were not able to." So imagine Jesus, Peter, John, and James just coming down from the Mount of Transfiguration. Peter, John, and James had just seen Jesus turn into this amazing white figure, right? Like, oh my goodness, they just heard God speaking down to them like from a cloud, and they're just walking down. They're like, I am reassured that I made the right decision in following Christ. So they're really confident, right? And they come down this mountain, they get to the bottom, and they see this crowd, and they see this big crowd as they get to the bottom, and the crowd kind of opens up for them. Then they see their fellow disciples, and their disciples are arguing with the scribes. And Jesus comes up to them, asks them a really good question. He's like, "What are you arguing with them about?" And we really don't get an answer to it, but we do get this father coming with his son, and he says that he brought his father he was going to plan on bringing his son to Jesus so that he could exorcise the demon out of him. Well, Jesus wasn't there, and in the first century, when your rabbi wasn't around, the disciples would take their place in their absence. They would fulfill their duties and obligations and responsibilities. And so the father's like, all right, I'll just bring it to the disciples, right? No problem. They'll be able to take this demon out of them. Well, they couldn't do it. And so you have the disciples over here and the scribes over here, and they're arguing with one another. And they're arguing with one another because the scribes saw the disciples' failure, and Jesus' credibility, their credibility, was on the line, right? And what is Jesus' response to this? He says, "Oh, faithless generation, how long am I to be with you?" And then later he tells the disciples, after he takes out this demon from the boy, he's like, "You guys didn't pray enough." He says, they ask him, like, how come we can exorcise the demon out of him? And Jesus is like, because you guys didn't pray enough. Because you guys didn't depend enough to get this demon out. Because they didn't have enough faith. They didn't have enough faith. Well, Jesus has the boy brought to him, and the demon or the spirit sees Jesus, and the boy freaks out, right? The demon takes hold of him, throws him to the ground. The boy starts foaming at the mouth, and Jesus is like, "How long has this been happening to him?" And the father's like, "Since a child, this demon has been throwing him into the fire and throwing him into water, and like this has been happening a lot. And since he's a child, right? Now he's a boy, so it's probably been many years of hardship and suffering." And the father comes up to Jesus. He's like, "If you can do anything, will you please have compassion on us and help us, help my son?" And Jesus kind of takes offense to this. He's like, if I can do anything, if the God who parted the Red Sea could do anything, right? Can the God who parted the Red Sea exorcise this demon out of your son? And right? And Jesus is like, all things are possible for those who believe. Right? And Jesus is saying, this can happen. This can happen. I can do this. I can take this spirit out of your son. Where is your belief? And just like he said to the crowd, to the disciples, to the scribes, and now to the Father, he's saying, where is your faith? Where is your faith in me, in God? Where is it? And the Father just comes out and says something really real. In a desperate situation, he says, "I believe. Help my unbelief." And then the crowds gather around, get a little bit closer, a little bit tighter, and Jesus demands that the demon come out of the boy, and does. He exorcises the demon out of the son. And everything leads to this moment in this story. Everything leads to Jesus exorcising the demon out of the son. And I wanted to ask, why did Jesus heal this boy? Why did Jesus heal this son? Why did he do it? Was Jesus somehow compelled by the faith of the Father to work this miracle? Was he somehow forced into it? And the answer is difficult, because the answer is yes and no. See, the Father had enough faith in Jesus to bring his son to Jesus, right? Like he brought his son to Jesus, right? He had enough faith in Jesus. He's like, I'm going to bring my son to you to take this demon out of him. And he's like, oh, I have enough faith in Jesus that he's trained his disciples to do this. And so he brings him to the disciples, and the disciples aren't able to do it. So he had at least some faith. And no one is actually going to have a miracle done in Jesus' name without some faith. Without some faith, right? Like if you're just an atheist and something happens, and you need a miracle, maybe you cry out to God, but that's still in God's name, right? But if a miracle happens, it's not in Jesus' name. Maybe it is sovereignly, but not to that man. Not to that man. It wasn't in his name. So the Father has at least some faith. And so, yes, like Jesus was compelled by the faith of the Father to work this miracle in his Son. But was he forced into it? And this is where the prosperity gospel gets it wrong. He was not forced into it. Jesus is the Messiah. He's the second head of the Trinity. And as Psalm 115:3 says, our God is in heaven. He does all that he pleases. And even he was not forced into this. The faith of the Father did not force Jesus to perform this miracle. Okay, he chose to. He chose to perform the miracle. Faith helped. Right? It was not forced. And honestly, the Father even recognizes the lack of faith he has. And he didn't have enough faith for Jesus to be forced into it. And yet Jesus, he does it anyways. Because Jesus does all that he pleases. So, was he forced into it? No, this passage is not teaching us that our faith will lead to automatic miracles. It's not saying that. But what is Mark trying to teach us? What is Mark trying to teach his audience? What is Jesus trying to teach his audience through this story? And to put it simply, Mark and Jesus are teaching their audience that God is more pleased with honest wrestling than with ignorant confidence. With honest wrestling than with ignorant confidence. Mark is writing to persecuted Roman Christians, where it's obvious people have been struggling with their faith. I would be too. If I saw my friend his head being chopped off or being burned at the stake, I'd be like, is this faith of mine, is my faith in Jesus worth enough for me to die? Worth enough for all these people to be persecuted? And Mark is trying to encourage them with this story. He's trying to encourage them, lean into that struggle. Just as the Father of the Son, of this demon-possessed son, lean into that struggle. Just as he was like, yes, I believe. Help my unbelief. And obviously Jesus is calling him grow. Genuinely grow in your faith. And so Mark is telling these Roman Christians, grow in your faith. Genuinely grow in your faith. And so God is more pleased with us wrestling honestly in situations that we stepped into, that we understand more completely, than us just having this blind faith going forward. He wants us to honestly wrestle, look at our heart, look at our faith, and then genuinely grow it. And so how does this truth apply to us today? Well, I see in my Generation Z or the millennial, I'm kind of right in that middle piece. I don't really know. Honestly, I'm born in 1997, so people tell me I'm a Gen Z, or some people tell me I'm a millennial. I honestly probably think I'm a Gen Z. But what I see in at least those generations, or 20-somethings, whatever, there's a culture around being really honest, about being very genuine, very vulnerable, about looking at your heart and seeing your emotions and having an honest assessment about ourselves. But what I don't see is a lot of wrestling. I don't see a lot of stepping into that honest assessment of ourselves and our faith and trying to grow out of it. I don't see actually us saying we're wrong. Like we can have an honest assessment of ourselves, but we don't grow from it. We don't say we're wrong, or like there's something wrong about our faith, and like we need to grow from it. At least from born again believers, and that's my call for us today. Like we need to step in. We need to step into the situation. We need to look at our hearts. We need to look honestly at our faith in the promises of God and say, man, I don't believe, help my unbelief. And just cry out to God, like, help my unbelief. Help me to believe these truths and these promises. For example, let's grow, let me grow, let's grow in our faith that suffering refines us like gold and fire. And because honestly, I don't believe in that truth as much as I want to. But I want to grow in my belief of that truth. Right? I honestly assessed the situation, honestly assessed it, and now I want to wrestle with my heart, wrestle with my faith, and grow in that faith. And so I want to call you to that today. Join a small group. Be a disciple. Ask someone to disciple you. Disciple another person. Like, step into your faith. Reflect. Get it out in the open. And then honestly wrestle and grow in your faith. And cry out to God just like the Father did. Say, God, I believe. Help my unbelief. Thanks, guys.